Hello, and welcome to The Void, where we talk about true crime on a weekly basis here on the internet. If you're new, thank you for joining us, and feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're returning, welcome back. As always, down in the description will be a link to my Twitter and a link to my Patreon. On Patreon, a portion of your donations or patronage goes towards the nonprofit Thorn, who their mission is to create technology to aid in the fight against trafficking in children. So there's more information over there. Let's get into the case. So a few weeks ago, I told you all the story of a man by the name of Elliot Rodger. He was the killer virgin that wrote the 141-page manifesto declaring that the world owed him sex, and that as retribution for not getting that, he would go out and take the lives of innocent people. Just a great guy overall. This week's video, however, is about another young man who, while his story was similar, it wasn't quite the same, but he was in fact actually an associate of Elliot Rodger before he committed the Isla Vista massacre. As you know, Elliot Rodger was deceased after that point, so he befriended him before then, and they talked. This man's name is Alek Minassian. Alek was born on November 3rd, 1992, to father Vahi and mother Sona Minassian. Both of his parents were professionals in the field of information technology. They were IT professionals, and this inspired Alek to enter the field as well upon going to college. Alek, however, was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome at the time. This is a form of autism that has since been reclassified as autism spectrum disorder. So calling it Asperger's, I don't know what the gray area is there, but now we call it autism spectrum disorder. But at the time, Asperger's is what he was diagnosed with as a child. As such, living with Asperger's, now reclassified as autism spectrum disorder, he spent his afternoons working with a social service community program that was named Helpmate. Now, as a teenager, Alek attended high school at the Thornlea Secondary School. And while he was there, he attended a special education class named Learning Strategies. His classmates described him as awkward and having notable physical tics, and that he appeared to have special needs stemming from disability. Some of his former classmates even expressed surprise at the fact that he was even able to operate the vehicle that he used to perpetrate his eventual attack. During his time in high school, Alek would fidget, twitch, and wrap his arms around his torso. He would also meow to himself like a cat and spit on himself occasionally. He could often be heard uttering the phrase to himself, "I'm scared of girls." He would be repeating that phrase, "I'm scared of girls," to himself, under his breath or quietly, not speaking to anybody in particular. Many of the people who are familiar with him, or who are just familiar with the autism spectrum, are worried about the negative image that what Minassian did has cast on people with autism. But the important thing here is that experts do stress that people who do have autism are no more likely to be violent than anybody in the general population. So if you're not scared about some random guy being violent, then there's no need for you to be scared that somebody who has autism or any of the autism related things is going to be violent towards you. It's just a one-off case, just like any other random guy. It just so happens that this person, Alek Minassian, did have autism spectrum disorder. Once Alek did graduate from Thornlea, he went to Seneca College, where according to his LinkedIn profile, he did spend 7 years getting qualified in the IT field, as I said, following his parents. Everyone that he went to Seneca College with described him as socially awkward, but extremely intelligent. He was more than capable of managing the coursework and the knowledge required to be an IT professional, but he seemed to dislike being the center of attention, which, I mean, even outside of the autism spectrum disorder, I can agree with that. I hate being in the spotlight. So, I can't blame him there. Minassian did hold several jobs in the IT field before he decided to drop out of Seneca before completing his studies in favor of joining the Canadian military. He requested a formal discharge however, after 16 days of their basic combat training slash boot camp. I don't really know what they call it. Probably one of the two. I know that we call the U.S. military, we call ours a combination of the both, depending on which branch you're in. But after just 16 days of their basic course, their basic combat training, or their boot camp, or whatever they call it, he requested a formal discharge, and it was granted. So he left the military after 16 days of their initial training. So after he left the Canadian Army, he did go back to college, and he managed to finish his degree in information technology. One student recalls that a few days before his eventual attack, he mass texted some of the other students a message saying, and I quote, "Finally finished college. Fuck you all and good riddance." I wonder what they did to him to make him feel like that. Not saying that they had to have done anything. It seems like there was a lot of animosity there. I don't know. But as you'll see here soon, there was indeed a lot of animosity inside of the mind and heart of Alek Minassian that drove him to do the things that he eventually would do after graduating. Now that we have a little bit of a background on who he is, where he's from, the kind of things that he grew up with, his aspirations being to be an IT professional like his parents, how about some background on the actual attack, what he did? Alek was active in several online communities and was reported to have been in contact with Elliot Rodger himself before he conducted the Isla Vista massacre back in 2014. He self-reported, so that is he, Alek Minassian himself, reporting that the last contact that he had with Rodger was on May 20th, 2014, which, if you remember, was just 3 days before the Isla Vista massacre, which occurred on May 23rd.
Who did you have conversation with first? Let me ask you that.
Elliot.
Elliot. So how did you learn of Elliot?
Because we private messaged each other on Reddit.
Yep.
After I saw one of his posts, and we just talked about each other, got to know each other, and we found each other very interesting. We both had the same frustrations at society,
right,
despite being separated by distance so far apart.
Right. Did you ever visit him?
No, but I wish I could have.
Yeah. Did he ever come and visit you?
No, but I wish he did.
Yeah. When specifically did you first contact or have contact with Elliot?
January of 2014.
2014. And when did you stop having communication with him?
As soon as he was deceased.
Okay. So his act, I know, took place in 2014, but I wasn't aware of the exact day. What day was it?
May 23, 2014.
May 23rd. Yeah, you said that. So when did you last speak to him?
May 20.
May 20th.
Minassian bought into the whole Incel community. Incel, if you don't remember, of course, is a term for young men that are involuntarily celibate. That's the in and cel. The men in this community tend to harbor strong and negative feelings towards both women and other men who are not part of the Incel community themselves. Alek found this community first on Reddit, but then more intensely on 4chan, as that site has much less moderation, so communities like this can grow and fester without any kind of supervision most of the time. The men in this incel subculture did come to idolize Rodger in the aftermath of the Isla Vista massacre, and Minassian was one of the men who grew to look up to him the most, as they did, like I say, they did correspond regularly, and they found that they had many things in common, what with hating society and men and women in general. This subculture of incels on particularly 4chan also developed their own slang terms for those that were on the outside. Names like Chad and Stacy were used to refer to conventionally attractive males and females, respectively, amongst other terms for people who lived on the outside of their little community.
When did you first go on to 4chan?
2014.
2014, and specifically when in 2014?
May 23, 2014.
And how were you able to remember that?
Because I remember that was a very significant day.
Okay. What was that?
That was when Elliot Rodger decided to essentially commit an uprising, a beta uprising, if you will,
Right.
against the Chads and the Stacys. It's basically a movement of angry incels, such as myself, who are unable to get laid. Therefore, we want to overthrow the Chads, which would force the Stacys to be forced to reproduce with the incels.
Right. Okay. And when you say incels,
Involuntary celibate. And we were plotting a certain timed strikes on society in order to confuse and shake the foundations, just to put all the normies in a state of panic.
okay. And who would be a normie?
Normie means normal people. That would be anyone who is considered to be normal by the unfair standards of society.
But not the Chads or Stacys.
Chads and Stacys are actually above normies, or at least they think they're above
Of course,
normies.
yeah. So the targets, who would the targets for this uprising be?
All of the alpha males.
All the alpha males. So the Chads.
Yes.
So those are the people that you want to kill.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And who else?
Any of the Stacys who do not wish to give their love and affection to the incels.
So they're a target as well.
Yes.
To be killed.
Yes.
Okay. And what about the normies? Normies.
Yes, we don't necessarily wish to kill the normies, but we do wish to subjugate them in order to make them understand that that our type is the more superior one.
Right. So when you say subjugate, what do you mean by that?
Meaning either imprison them or put them in a lower position in society.
Okay.
So that they acknowledge the incels or the Pepe the Frog types as the more superior ones.
So you're saying things that I'm not familiar with.
So,
So
sorry.
what's a Pepe the
But
Frog?
he's a mascot on 4chan.
He's a mascot?
Yes.
Oh, mascot on 4chan.
Yes.
And he's
I was using a metaphor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he's actually worshipped quite frequently.
Oh.
You can hear Alec talking and using all these terms as if they're a normal way to speak in dialogue with another human being in person in the interview from after the attack, where he's being interviewed by a detective. Now, it's important to note, Alec was eventually found guilty of all of the crimes that he was charged with, but his sentencing has not come yet, so he's still in limbo on the time that he's going to have to serve for the things that he did. But he does talk a lot about having a mission and how his mission was complete. And he talks about just, in general, you'll see it in the footage right here.
I was starting to feel radicalized at that time.
You were. Okay. And when you say radicalized, what do you mean by that?
Meaning I felt it was time to take action and not just sit on the sidelines and to just fester in my own sadness.
Right on. Okay.
Now, as for the actual crimes, what he did to those people, and the reason why I'm making a video on him now. Alec went to the rental company Ryder and rented a 10-foot moving van on April 23rd, 2018. One of the employees reportedly had to show him how to release the parking brake on the vehicle to even get the vehicle moving, as he didn't know how. Once he left the Ryder, he traveled 20 to 30 minutes to get to Yonge Street in downtown Toronto. Yonge Street was the pre-planned location for his retribution, just like his friend Elliot Rodger's retribution. Alec was a spree killer like Elliot before him, but his method of attack didn't have anything to do with firearms. He just ended up running people down on the sidewalk with his rented 10-foot moving van. His spree, however, was cut short when someone's drink splashed onto the windscreen of the van, and he got scared that he would eventually crash the van somewhere where he couldn't recover it due to a lack of visibility because of the drink on the windscreen, which is it's really good that he didn't know potentially how to operate the windshield wipers, because those are there for that. So oversight on his part. I mean, he could have kept going, but thankfully he did not, because he thought that he would crash because he couldn't see. Good. However, this wasn't enough. This didn't happen soon enough to stop him from striking 26 people, 10 of whom were fatally wounded and died. I would like to say rest in peace to all 26 of these victims. I will have their names and faces, if I can find them, here. But I just want to say rest in peace to the 10 people who lost their lives doing nothing but innocently walking down the street in Toronto that day. The other 16 were just injured and were able to make recoveries in hospital. But once Minassian jumped out of the vehicle because he was scared to crash it and render it inoperable, he heard a police officer. The police, of course, confronted Mr. Minassian. And once he saw that he was being confronted by the police, Alek Minassian drew his wallet from his pocket in a motion similar to how someone would draw a firearm, and he pointed it at the officer in an attempt to get the officer to fire on him. When this didn't work, he reholstered his wallet and then drew it again in order to get the officer to fire on him. He was subsequently arrested with no shots being fired. Now, it's easy to get caught up in talking about how cringy or cringeworthy the interrogation footage of Mr. Minassian is, or talk about how he was stopped, his plan was thwarted by a drink being splashed on a windshield that has windshield wipers specifically for that reason, or get caught up in hating people who have Asperger's, formerly known as Asperger's, now known as autism spectrum disorder, or any type of anything on the autism spectrum. But I think the important thing here is to remember the names, faces, and lives of those who lost their lives that day at the hand of someone who, quite frankly, didn't have any care or regard for human life. He was just furthering an agenda which I think he just adopted because he needed something in his life. He ended up looking up to the wrong people, namely Elliot Rodger and the rest of the Incels, who want to bring about an Incel uprising and a retribution upon the world that they believe wronged them by doing nothing. So, again, I would like to say rest in peace to the 10 people who did lose their lives that day. And I hope that Mr. Minassian gets his just desserts in 2022, that's next year, when they do end up sentencing him for his crimes. He was found guilty on 10 counts of murder and 16 counts of attempted murder. So it's not going to be a light sentence, regardless of what happens. But that's where this story ends. He did what he did and got caught. He tried to commit suicide by cop and failed. And now he's being sentenced next year. I assume it has something to do with the current worldwide sickness spreading. So, I'm not going to ask if you like that story because it was quite sad. It happened quite recently, 3 years ago in 2018. A number of people lost their lives very quickly. So there's not much to like about that. However, I would appreciate it if you did leave a comment or like if you like the video. I'm not going to say if you like the subject matter. But please do remember the victims of this. I hope that their names outshine the person who did this to them. And thank you all for watching. Thank you especially to my patrons, helping fight the good fight against people who deal in the trafficking of children. And thank you for just watching. If you did just watch, if you didn't like, you didn't comment, you didn't subscribe, if you made it this far, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming to gaze into the void with me. I hope it did not gaze back into you. And stay safe until next time. I love you all. Goodbye.